Come here, girl. Wipe your nose and listen well. No strong man, no mountain-toppling giant, no muscle man is going to be able to parry a blow aimed at him by a draco-lizard's tail, a gigascorpion's pincer, or a griffin's claw. And that's precisely the sort of weapons the pendulum simulates. So don't even try to parry. You're not deflecting the pendulum. You're deflecting yourself from it. You're intercepting its energy, which you need in order to deal a blow. A light but very swift deflection and an instantaneous, equally swift blow from a reverse half-turn is more than enough. You're picking impetus up by rebounding. Do you see? Speed, Siri. Speed, not strength. Strength is necessary for a lumberjack axing trees in a forest. That's why, admittedly, girls are rarely lumberjacks. Greetings and salutations, brothers and sisters, and today we shall begin discussing the Witcher training, equipment, and combat technique, something that I have briefly touched upon in my overall Witcher summary. So, if you have not seen that video, I heartily suggest you go check it out and then come back here. But in this video, we shall go a bit more in depth and explain some of the finer aspects concerning the combat techniques the Witchers employ in battle. One thing that is necessary to keep in mind is that the Witchers, if successfully trained, are not mere humans, but they have been carefully augmented on a genetic level to be able to effectively and effortlessly carry out tasks which even the best ordinary swordsman may find either impractical or impossible to execute well. Sapkowski also takes great liberty with concepts like alchemy and chemistry in general, and there are a number of details concerning especially some of the fancier parts of the Witcher armory that we either know too little about to actually judge by real-world standards, or which are just plainly dumb and very impractical in any real situation. So, training a boy to become a Witcher. Not an easy task. Believe you me. I have already mentioned that most recruits for the Witcher guilds are orphans or unwanted children from families with too many mouths to feed, or, on rare occasions, they can be children of destiny, given to Witchers as a reward for their services. These recruits are collected by the Witchers on their travels and taken to their home fortress, where they join the ranks of other recruits and are subjected to a number of difficult physical exercises, psychological evaluations, and biological tests, all meant to simultaneously increase and evaluate their overall potential as Witchers. You might think this process would have quite a few rejects, but the opposite is true. Most Witchers, if they deem a child unfit for training, do not bother bringing the boy into the school to begin with, so the dropout rates among recruits are actually very, very low, if any at all. Next, all candidates are subjected to a diet consisting of various herbs and shrooms, along with a healthy dosage of proteins and vitamins to help them build muscle mass and create reserve energy for the metabolism. Now, the Witchers are very, very protective as to the identity of these mushrooms, but Triss spells out some of their specific effects when talking about changes taking place inside Ciri. Quote, "The fungi whose secrets you guard so jealously truly are helping the girl stay in excellent condition and strengthen her muscles. The herbs help provide the ideal balance for the transition of mass to muscle and speed up her development. All this, combined with the murderous training you put her through, evokes certain changes in the structure of the young body. Triss references this specifically when talking about the very real possibility of Ciri losing her more female physical attributes due to the Witchers putting her through their first phase training. This leads me to believe, though I am an amateur herbalist at the very best, and so you should take anything I say here with just a pinch of salt, that at least 3 types of herb, or at least their real-world equivalents, are used in the early stages of training. The shrooms provided to recruits come from the Cordyceps genus, a breed of over 400 species of parasitic cave fungi. Most tests are in the modern age run using Cordyceps sinensis and Cordyceps militaris, which, if taken regularly, in appropriate doses, can greatly improve the overall energy output of the body, affect the buildup of testosterone, be a natural exercise performance booster, especially with younger, untrained athletes, and even is reportedly capable of slowing down some physical aspects of aging. Then, I suspect they also use something along the lines of the maca, a root from Peruvian plant which not only helps transform mass into muscle, but also greatly improves the capacity for learning in young children, and, interestingly enough, also increases the libido size and overall sexual performance in men, which would explain a thing or two from the books, let me tell you. And, finally, the humble everyday elderberry, the natural medicine kit as it is called, and one of the oldest herbs used to treat a wide variety of illnesses throughout history, which has a strong effect on the overall immunity of the user, if consumed in appropriate form, that is. While these 3 are, I suspect, the main course for young witchers, so to speak, there are also undoubtedly dozens of other species of mushrooms and berries served to the young recruits, all meant to make them as healthy and resistant to all illnesses and fatigue as possible. For you see, the next step requires the young recruits to be infected and poisoned with pretty much anything capable of killing them, really. The recruits were told to consume the so-called grasses, a special semi-magical strain of herbs of unknown species, which are designed to do one thing, and one thing only: take apart the sorry sots forced to consume them from the inside out. It really does mess up the young recruits on a molecular level, breaking apart every cell in their body and leaving it open to manipulation. It is almost akin to a second gestation period for the young boys, except they feel every second of it. Common side effects include heavy sweating, migraines, diarrhea, swelling, vomiting, seizures, and hallucinations, to name but a few. Throughout the process, the recruits are carefully monitored by the overseeing mages, who artificially stabilize the body just enough for the metabolism to not completely self-destruct, and leave it to slowly but surely collapse in on itself for about 3 days. Then, on the 4th day, they begin with the second phase, the process of rebuilding the body. Yet now, with the organs and body parts partially disassembled and viable to mutation and alteration, the sorcerers begin the process of changes, augmenting the witcher's molecule by molecule, from the obvious changes such as the feline slender eyes and larger capacity for building and preserving muscle mass, to small, yet arguably even more important things such as their nasal sensitivity, perception range, or reaction time. After 7 days of intense pain, physical and mental strain, and perhaps most importantly extensive physiological mutations occurring at an unhealthy pace, the trial is done. There are only 2 possible outcomes for the trial of grasses: complete success or a complete death. It should be mentioned that most trials of grasses can be very different in the specific ingredients and practices applied. For example, the school of the wolf used different techniques than the school of the cat or the school of the bear, but even internally the magicians of each school liked to experiment once in a while. Because as we all know, torturing little boys does get boring eventually, as strange as it may seem. And so, if the test subject is unusually resilient, and if his body shows signs of accepting the standardized mutation well enough, the sorcerer will subject him to additional mutations and augmentations, which will either kill the unfortunate recruit or make him even stronger, faster, and more durable than his peers. This is precisely what happened to Geralt during his trial. The sorcerer noticed that he had a connection to the winds of magic that was greater than usual, was intrigued, and decided to stab the unfortunate youngster with a few more needles than was custom in Kaer Morhen. This is what gave Geralt his greater strength, and made him such an outstanding witcher later in life, but this is also what caused his hair to completely lose color. Despite being called the White Wolf, he really should be called the Bleached Wolf, which actually sounds a whole lot cooler, at least in my opinion. The average mortality rate for young recruits is highest at this stage. Only 3 out of every 10 survive the trial, and many can and do succumb even later if unorthodox mutations were tested out on them. Yet despite these massive casualties, there is one important fact you should know about the Hexers that is very important in the books. All witchers are sterilized. No, not in the unsullied fashion, since, unlike the good masters of Astapor, the sorcerers actually were aware that to keep a male warrior at peak performance, you actually do have to let him keep his genitalia. But rather, they are chemically sterilized during the latter part of the trial, the reconstruction phase. Now, it is never made explicitly clear in the books as to whether this is intentional or not, but seeing as witchers do become rather horny after their transformation, as they are basically pumped full of steroids and performance enhancers, and because nobody wants to be outbred by a race of beings superior to them in every single way, the elves should know, I believe this is an intentional alteration, designed specifically to prevent witchers from getting out of control and being able to replenish their numbers themselves. For you see, even the most senior instructors at Kaer Morhen only knew the basics about how to actually carry out a proper trial, and most certainly lacked the necessary magical skills to complete these changes on their own, ensuring they were good, obedient little pets who would not violently murder their makers if they wished to preserve their kind. After this, young recruits, who are now for all intents and purposes Witcher apprentices, are subjected to further changes, with a capital C, wherein they are once again fed a diet of shrooms and herbs meant to improve their physical condition, and are carefully monitored for any signs of physical or mental deterioration, at least in the Wolf School. This, however, is where the Witchers are truly being formed, not only in body but in mind and spirit as well. The School of the Wolf teaches its novices not only to fight, but to think, to listen, prepare, and be, if at all possible, honest and honorable professionals. The training that teaches them these skills and principles, however, is brutal and unforgiving, and often claims almost as many lives as the Trial of Grasses. First off, young boys are put under rigorous, constant training, aimed at solidifying their acquired martial potential. Their instructors whip them into shape, sometimes literally, and force them to practice rudimentary yet physically challenging tasks, each day, every day, for several years. They are, for example, forced to complete the track, a series of challenges and obstacles, both natural and artificial, on a narrow forest path that winds around Kaer Morhen. These challenges included slender logs of lumber acting as bridges over pits filled with spikes, stony walls with no obvious vantage points, and presumably all other kinds of overly complicated and highly uncomfortable obstacles young apprentices are supposed to overcome. It is specifically designed to teach the young witchers how to move quickly, lightly, and quietly, to learn how to properly make use of their entire body and get a grip on precise, swift coordination of all their movements. Many a witcher has suffered his first serious injury trying to set a new record while completing the track, and young boys at Kaer Morhen eventually gave another, far more befitting name to the narrow pathway: the Gauntlet. Then begins the actual training. First off, every single apprentice is taught to wield the universal weapon of the Witchers, the sword. Now, before I begin talking about the Witcher fighting style at all, I need to give a shout out to Alan from the Swords Path. This guy is Polish, a swordsman, and a huge fan of The Witcher. The ideal combination of personal attributes, really, and his channel is mostly dedicated to examining and teaching the more martial aspects of The Witcher as a whole. His skill with the blade is amazing, and when he is explaining the complexities of swordplay to you, you feel as though he was talking about how best to prepare a fine, juicy piece of meat. I cannot recommend his channel enough to anyone interested in an in-depth analysis of the various Witcher combat techniques, so by all means do click on the link to his channel I will leave in the description below. The fighting style of the Witchers is, as I already mentioned, completely unprecedented in Europe, as I had a hard time finding anything that actually resembles their combat technique in general. The closest I could find is the Indian Sikh Gatka sword dance, which, even then, is an overwhelmingly ceremonial affair and is not meant or designed for actual combat, as the combatants often don't even use swords, but only wooden lookalikes, and even then, this is only used in the sport version of the dance, the kell, where points are actually scored for hitting the stick of the opponent, not the opponent himself. In-universe, Witcher combat style is said to be built on mostly elvish techniques, seeing as elves always placed a far greater emphasis on accuracy and mobility than brute force, but it is also mentioned to be a fair bit more robust and blunt than the flowery style of the Elder race. That is mostly due to the types of opponents the Witchers are fighting, since most combat techniques did, historically speaking, develop specifically to counter defense mechanisms of their opponents. In case of the Witchers, they usually fight against creatures with the capability to end them with a single successful blow, either due to their immense strength, poisoned fangs, or claws, precise strikes meant specifically to immobilize their prey and cut its arteries, or any other number of reasons that resulted in the same basic principle. Do not get hit. All Witchers are taught to shoot first, so to speak, and offense is valued far more than defense in the combat. This all-in, you hit or you die attitude means that Witchers are taught the art of the master strike, how to put as much force behind every blow at maximum speed. This results in a wide variety of techniques that no historical swordsman worth his salt would use. Most notably, the Witcher combat technique contains a lot of pirouettes, whirls, dodges, feints, spins, and finesses. They are centered far more around cutting and slashing than stabbing or half-swording, all of which make the Witcher look more akin to a dancer than a swordsman. This, to any skilled warrior from history, would seem a ludicrous idea. All these poses and jumping around require a lot of concentration, they expose your unarmored body unnecessarily, and are generally considered an impractical waste of energy that will most likely get you turned into a pile of meat. Yet there is a reason why Witchers are taught to wield their swords in this way. Consider, for a moment, the types of enemies the Witcher is going to be fighting. There are usually three kinds of monsters plaguing the world. Large beasts, huge predators that live and hunt alone or in pairs, and are often slow or not exactly the quickest, but make up for their lack of speed with an overabundance of thick outer shells or other natural types of protection, and are usually capable of killing a man with a single blow. After that, there are the medium-sized humanoid creatures, which either stalk their prey alone or hunt in small packs, which are usually swift and nimble and deadly in close-quarters combat, even if they are a bit more on the squishy side of the spectrum. And finally, he might be sent against a horde of screeching, ravenous little monsters who lack any kind of natural protection, but make up for it with deadly teeth and overwhelming numbers, trying to swamp their opponents under a tide of bodies and claws. and the Witcher does not always know which one of these he is going to be fighting before the actual combat begins. Of course, he'll do his damnedest to try and figure that out if he wants to walk out of the fight alive, but either way, he must be prepared to deal with any of these types of enemies, both in the way he is trained and equipped. Say the Witcher is fighting, for example, a troll, a big, tough opponent with a nasty habit of regenerating even the most savage wounds almost instantly, and of course, a single blow from said troll is going to result in, you guessed it, instant death. The Witcher is able to keep his distance and avoid the slow, cumbersome but brutally powerful blows of the savage monster until the troll tires out and starts to slow down his movements, and eventually he might even drop his guard for a while. That is when the Witcher, who has far greater stamina and is a lot more mobile, will start to attack. A slash through the throat, a cut in the joints, a stab into the eye socket. None of these might kill the monster outright, but if inflicted at a rapid pace and with enough force, it might just work. The spins and whirls, therefore, serve to both rapidly approach the tired, angry creature, inflict the blow with enough kinetic force behind it to actually pierce the fat, rocky hide of the troll, and then just as quickly retreat to a safe distance. Now, imagine the Witcher fighting a medium-sized opponent, like for example a werewolf. The werewolf is quick, perhaps even quicker than the Witcher at times, and gifted with a wide arsenal of deadly natural weapons, which can rip a man into pieces with 1 or 2 successful strikes. But while his body is almost purely muscle and sinew with precisely 0 fat in between, he has no outer shell, no protective carapace, and his arms are long. Well, in the games, the werewolves are the wolf-man hybrid who just kind of look both like a man and a wolf. In the books, the werewolves we meet actually are just like huge black wolves, so take that as you will, but either way. And he's not at all suited to protecting his valuable organs. A Witcher would use his speed to avoid the claws of the wolfman, perhaps he might even try to roll underneath his swings or around his grasping jaws, and with a single powerful slash he could gut the unfortunate monster before it had a chance to react to this change. If, by some chance, the monster is then still alive and kicking, the Witcher will bide his time, dodging its strikes and waiting for the now grievously injured werewolf to lose strength and bleed out, or maybe just biding his time until the poison with which he coated his sword starts working. Because the Witcher only really needs a single blow to win in most fights, and his training and augmented speed mean that he will almost always be the first to draw blood. And finally, a horde type of enemy. This is the ones Witchers are least well equipped to actually deal with, and the ones they actually hate fighting against the most, since they once again are designed as duelists or hunters of large game. They are not very well equipped to deal with smaller horde types of enemies, but as centuries passed, many of the more senior Witchers developed specific tactics to deal with large amounts of smaller opponents. When you are being swarmed by knickers, goblins, imps, or any other type of small, agile monsters, you want to do the exact opposite of what you did to the humanoid and large monster. You want to keep them as far away from yourself as possible, and expect an attack from all sides at all times. It also does not hurt to try and intimidate them with an impressive display of force or magic, as most of these are cowardly, weak-willed creatures who prefer an easy meal to a solid fight, and putting at least a few of them on the run is therefore never a bad thing. In this scenario, being able to whirl around in a wide arc with one fluid motion is definitely your best and safest option, as the Witchers make it abundantly clear to even the most dim-witted of his enemies that the first one to come in range of his sword will die no matter what, and well, none of the small little monsters are going to be very eager to sacrifice themselves for the greater good. It should be noted, however, that an ordinary human is rarely capable of utilizing these techniques to their full potential, because even though the difference in actual physical strength between a human and a Witcher at peak performance is not especially remarkable, Combined with their unnatural speed and agility, it results in blows that are far more powerful and precise than what a human is capable of. And as such, for most humans to try and copy these techniques would be downright wasteful. As already mentioned, you can learn how to fight like a witcher, as was demonstrated in the videos before, and in the modern world where armor is pretty much non-existent, you will definitely come out on top in close quarters combat with untrained or weakly trained opponents. But if you ever find yourself facing someone even slightly armored and well trained with a melee weapon who is not super defensive and will try to counterattack in a fight, the odds may not be as much in your favor. In the books, Geralt very rarely uses his swords to deal with heavily armored human opponents, and has a whole host of very non-standard tactics and tricks for knocking out knights and the heavy infantry. To master these techniques, young witchers are forced to train with very creative devices, built to simulate combat with both human and non-human opponents. The most infamous of these is the pendulum, a wooden log hanged from a chain, swinging above several small wooden poles. During this exercise, young apprentices are supposed to hit a straw dummy while balancing on a small pole and simultaneously avoiding the massive swinging lump of wood, metal and death which is in constant motion all around them. This exercise is aimed at improving the coordination skill of young witchers, to teach them proper footwork and help them keep their balance in an ideal state. Did I mention by the by that the entire pendulum is positioned on the edge of Kaer Morhen battlements, so a single misstep in the wrong direction could cause certain death or at least terrible injury? No? Well, now you know. Oh, and one more thing actually, this entire exercise is practiced each day, every day, while the apprentice is blindfolded. So yes, you are balancing on a small wooden stump over a rocky canyon of doom, while a monstrous heavy club of a log is swinging all around you, all the while blind. Oh, and did I mention that the pendulum could actually be fitted with 2 wooden logs, or even more, alternatively? No, I did not mention that? Well, now you know that too. Another common enough machine found in Kaer Morhen is the windmill, a rotating dummy which the young witchers are meant to successfully strike, all the while avoiding its swings and thrusts. The windmill can reportedly be set to various difficulties, making its arms rotate faster or slower, depending largely on the skill of the pupil practicing with it, and is meant to help hone the agility, reaction speed and accuracy of the young witchers. But even these difficult exercises would be for naught if they were not honed in actual combat. At first, novices only train with their sword instructors, the resident senior fencing masters and their assistants, who, mind you, are not of the forgiving sort, and if they get the impression that the apprentice is not paying sufficient attention or otherwise slacking off, they will more than happily beat the ever-loving snot out of said recruit in a personal duel, to leave some bruises that remind the young witcher to always pay close attention, especially if a senior is talking. Due to this practice, most witchers only slack off once in their lives, the first and the last time. But these instructors appreciate talent and dedication above all else, and will attempt to assist any recruit who shows these qualities, even if he might be struggling at first. As ever, witchers are very individualistic in their approach to life, and training new generations of witchers is no exception to that rule. And then come the more creative challenges, you might say. Have you ever tried fighting knee-deep in water? No. Have you ever tried fighting knee-deep in water with one hand? No. Well, have you ever tried fighting knee-deep in water with one hand in pitch blackness? Well, in case you haven't, first of all, don't even try. Just don't. Instead, ask your resident witcher what it is like. I'm sure he will be more than excited to describe this ordeal to you in great detail. Other exercises include fighting in narrow tunnels, on mountainsides, cliffs, or even frozen ice of the Great Lake near Kaer Morhen in the middle of winter. Imagination is really your limit when devising training exercises for the young Witcher apprentices, and I have a feeling that most high school teachers from our modern world would have a field day devising the various techniques which were meant to both sate their enormous ego and their desire to torture their students as much as improve their skills in battle. But combat is only one part of the martial education the young apprentices receive, because contrary to what you might have gathered from the long exposition of the various martial abilities of the Witchers I just gave you, the Witcher has to fight with his mind before his body joins the fray, and that very literally at times. First off, all the apprentices who pass the trial of grasses and the changes are taught how to read, write, count and understand local law, all skills which are necessary for anyone wishing to sell his services effectively and not get cheated by his employers. The School of the Wolf was only known to teach its witchers the common tongue. It is unknown whether they also taught the Elder Speech, because while Geralt himself speaks it quite well, Geralt also spent a considerable amount of time in the Temple of Melitele in Elander, and we can therefore not be sure where exactly he was taught this language. But being able to read and write has one more important purpose. It gives the young witchers the possibility to access the Fortress School library. These contain a literal treasure trove of information regarding monsters and various species of monsters, magic, curses, alchemy, biology, medicine, combat, armed and unarmed, geography, and anything else the witcher may need to know in his life. Of course, most of this literature consists of manuals and study books, with precisely nothing in the way of poetry or romantic literature, and that is because, as with most things the Witchers possess, their library is a strictly utilitarian tool, meant only to improve their monster-slaying capabilities. Of course, the senior tutors are not foolish enough to simply let the youngsters study completely on their own, as even to creatures as patient and observant as the Witchers, studying is often a most boring exercise. And so, all Witchers are taught in the arts of alchemy, field medicine, and herbalism, alongside many lessons about the various species of beasts they shall undoubtedly face in their lifetime.
Anything to say for yourself, young lady?
I'm very sorry, Uncle Vesemir.
Young blood craves action, I understand that. But when you fight a beast, knowledge counts as much as your silver sword. At the very least, you ought to be able to tell a ghoul from an owl ghoul.
By markings, like unto the Panthera tigris that in Zerrikania dwells, and by the sickly paleness of its visage.
So you did read the chapter. Still, you should have asked if...
But you were asleep, Uncle Vesemir.
So you did the reading. Why not admit it right off?
Never pounce on an advantage as soon as it appears. Wait till it stands to have maximum effect. Uncle Vesemir's words.
Well, you're a quick study. Quick, but mischievous.
And, of course, I would be committing an egregious crime if I didn't mention the Witcher signs. Now, the signs are extremely basic spells and hexes, which are said to be extremely easy to master and perform in the field. Unlike most spells, which I shall explain thoroughly in my magic video, these do not require incantations or rituals, meaning they can be effortlessly incorporated into the general flow of combat, and only require a moment of steady concentration and a gesture performed with the fingers of one hand. Now, it is mentioned in the world of the Witcher that the signs only require a bare minimum of talent, meaning theoretically almost anybody could be able to learn them. And yet, I have to wonder, why is it that so few people in the world do not only not understand magic, but don't even spontaneously perform small magical feats on occasion? You would think that if the entire population was at least latently magically potent, there would be a lot more incidents of violent magical outbursts, and yet we almost never hear of any such incidents. which leads me to believe that the sorcerers who created the Witchers cheated in the process. Well, that would hardly be uncharacteristic for the sorcerers, now would it? Because it appears that having your already ridiculously overpowered murder machines be able to cast basic magic seemed like a great idea to the madman who created them. In my opinion, artificially linking the Witchers to the magical energies of the world during the reassembly part of the Trial of Grasses is the most logical explanation. It is also the only real explanation as to why all Witchers are at least somewhat magically potent, yet Lambert mentions that Ciri is a complete anti-talent when it comes to magic. Of course, Ciri is somewhat of a special case in this regard, but we'll get to that a bit later. At the same time, however, Witchers do not show signs of pain or unease when faced with dimeridium, a substance to which all mages show an ingrained aversion, so it remains a highly debatable topic. What we do know is what the individual signs do. The sign most widely used by the Witchers of all schools is Quen, known commonly as a Witcher's shield. It takes the form of a force field of a sort, a wall of concentrated magical energy capable of absorbing and dispelling most physical and even some magical attacks. Witchers do not like shields. Most are either too heavy and cumbersome for their way of fighting and would simply slow them down rather than help them, since much like heavy armor they are of little use when fighting larger beasts, or they are too small and thin to take any damage at all. Quen is the perfect alternative to that. Cast in a matter of nanoseconds and requiring the barest minimum of concentration to maintain, the durability of Quen depends solely on the weight of inflicted damage and the focus of the caster. While in the games, the shield can only be cast for a limited amount of time and will evaporate after 1 or 2 strikes, in the books Geralt is at one point able to hold back a freaking dinosaur for several minutes, using only the Quen sign for protection. Witchers can also cast Quen to protect their whole bodies, enveloping them with crackling bolts of lightning and warding off at least a couple of blows before dissipating. One interesting fact about Quen is that it can also be called the heliotrope sign. The heliotrope, used precisely twice in the books, appears almost identical to Quen in its effect and appearance, except it is cast by crossing your arms over your chest. This, and the way it is described, it leads me to believe that heliotrope is simply a stronger and longer lasting, but more cumbersome form of Quen, although the debate is still up as to what exactly heliotrope can be. Another commonly used sign is Igni, which really speaks for itself, a basic form of pyromancy. Igni is used as much in combat as it is used in more mundane tasks, such as lighting a campfire, igniting a candle, or simply heating up a pot of soup. It manifests in the form of a small flame or several sparks reaching from the hands of the Witcher, and can be made larger or smaller as need be. While it is unlikely to outright set an opponent ablaze instantly, it is hot enough to cause serious damage to anyone who comes too close, and is effectively used as a form of crowd control. After this comes Ard, the telekinetic attack. In the games, Ard is portrayed as a burst of force that can stun and even knock a person down, but in the books, Ard is really portrayed in a more traditional telekinetic way, since Witchers are capable of not only knocking objects down, but also moving wooden logs without touching them, and create a steady stream of energy to slow down and repel attackers. While Ard is inarguably a crude form of telekinesis, and you will not find a Witcher who is able to make his swords fly around him in circles, it is also undoubtedly a nifty little trick, and if well timed can cause a lot of problems for anyone the Witcher is fighting. Need to clown an opponent's judgment? Want to make a traumatized child calm and obedient? Do you desperately require information which the greedy son of a whore sitting across from you refuses to provide? Well, look no further than Axii, one of the more infamous Witcher signs. It is said of Witchers that they have evil eyes, capable of binding men and women to their will and sate their capricious needs. This legend is undoubtedly based upon the use of Axii, which serves as a form of telepathic hypnosis, Witchers use to coerce, confuse and calm other men if need be. Much like with snakes in the real world, it is believed amongst the peasants that a Witcher can bewitch a man simply by glaring at him, But just as with snakes in the real world, this assertion is false and exaggerated. Witchers have to stand relatively close to their targets, concentrate, and perform a simple hand hex to make it work, and even then the effect only lasts for a couple of minutes at best. Irden, known as the magical trap, is often used when fighting spirits or other ethereal forces, since it traps and slows your opponents in a sort of magic-free runic circle, making them more vulnerable and increasing your chance of actually causing damage. In the games, the trap also slows down humans and other monstrous opponents, but I think that this is the least used sign in the books altogether, except for the heliotrope version of Quen, and as such there is really not much to say about it. Finally, there is Somne, the sleeping sign, for when Axii just doesn't cut it enough. This sign has to be cast from an exceptionally close range, pretty much point blank actually, and only usually works on unprepared and unsuspecting targets, since it requires themselves to focus on the sign being cast. If successful, it instantly puts the target in a state of deep sleep, which can last for several hours or several minutes, depending on how focused the target is. Now, after all this, with the strength, the speed, the agility, the intelligence, and even basic magical prowess, you would think that it would be more than enough to make the Witcher an unstoppable killing machine. But even the Witcher requires more to do his job properly. He needs potions, poisons, oils, sufficient clothes and armor, a host of other gadgets, and, perhaps most importantly, even a Witcher needs a good sword. But that is a story for another day.
At the end of the path, I rest